Hi everyone. Looks like we had some flashing going on the screen there, but I think everything should be alright. Anyway, this is National Master Dennis Monokroussos, and this week we're going to take a look at the number 14 game in the U.S. Chess League's 2007 Game of the Year Countdown. White in this game was Eric Tangborn, who plays for the Seattle team, and black was Tangborn-Kuljasevic. I hope I'm not butchering his name. Who played for the league-winning team, the Dallas Destiny. This was played in the 8th week of the season. And I believe that as long as Kuljasevic didn't lose this game, his team would win. And in fact, he went on to win this game. So anyway, let's take a look at the game now. And it begins d4, knight f6, knight f3, c5, d5, b5, and now bishop to g5. So believe it or not, I mean, some of you probably have never had this position in your entire life. I haven't. I've never had this position in any of my games, blitz, bullet, tournament, correspondence, whatever. So this may be kind of unfamiliar to you, but ironically, this is the second game we've already looked at in just, I think this is our, 7th show here. And already it's occurred 2 times. So this, you might remember this from the Bonin-Molnar game from 3 weeks ago. And in that game, Molnar played knight to e4, got a perfectly good position, though he went on to lose. But it was a pretty even position. Maybe he even had a small edge at a couple of points before making a tactical error and losing that one. All right, well, in our game, Kuljasevic played queen to b6. And the point of this, or at least one point of this, is to maintain the integrity of the pawn structure, so that way if white captures on f6, black can recapture with the queen. Okay, well, despite this, bishop takes f6 is still the most common move, and again, black does indeed play queen takes f6 and so on. But in our game, Tangborn played knight to c3 instead. And this has a threat to play bishop takes f6, and then if queen takes f6, knight takes b5. So that's the idea. But I'm not sure if it's a great idea or not. So black played b4, kicking the poor knight, which gets sidelined on a5, and in fact, I don't think it ever moves again the rest of the game. So I think it just ends up stuck there, languishing in obscurity. Now, the plus side of this is that white does get to execute the plan of messing up black's pawn structure. So let's take a look at this position and think about it a little bit. So white, as I said, white has got the better pawn structure, but has given up the bishop here. He's got some dark square problems too. So it's not just that he's given up this bishop, but that there are some weaknesses that may cause white to miss this bishop. So you can see, I mean, black is going to play f5, which is in fact what happened. And after this bishop gets to g7, I mean, it's a pretty fertile diagonal here. I mean, c3 in particular is kind of weak for white. And also, because it's controlling both c3 and b2, there's this question about what white's knight on b2 is going to do to bring itself back into the game. So I kind of like black here. I mean, I think white is okay, but it seems like a more comfortable position for black to play. Now here, you might think that the right move is knight to b2. And this is pretty plausible, trying to bring the knight right back into play as quickly as possible and putting it on this very nice square on c4. So this is certainly an asset. The problem, though, seems to be that after bishop to g7, knight c4, we check, and then just a simple retreat like queen to a6, so that way the queen can swing along the third rank to another good location. Black's bishop is just monstrously strong, and the white knights are kind of awkward, and maybe black can take the a2 pawn as well. I mean, I'm not sure that he wants to take it, but maybe he can. At any rate, I mean, I think white's position is kind of awkward. So, although the knight on c4 is well placed, there are enough drawbacks to the white position that this probably isn't best. So instead of knight to b2, Tangborn played knight to d2. So he decided to bring the other knight to c4 and keep the knight on a4, where it maintains a watch over squares like c3. Okay, Kuljasevic played d6. Knight c4, queen c7. And here, I think this is kind of a key moment. And the reason why it's a key moment is that white's kind of finished with the knights. I mean, so they've kind of done their thing. And now he has to decide what exactly he's going to do with the rest of his development and to come up with some kind of plan, or at least a position where a plan will be natural. Now, I think there was one game prior to this one that reached this position. And I believe in that game that White, which was Philip Schlosser, who I believe is a GM, found, I think, a much better way to play the position. So White's got, I think, two things that he should try to achieve here. So one is that he should fianchetto his king bishop. So I think this is probably the best way to handle that part of his development. So by playing g3, it neutralizes the g file. It puts the bishop on a decent diagonal too. And one reason why it's a decent diagonal is that part of Black's plan is probably at some point to play a move like e6 or e5. I mean, he's going to finish the rest of his development first. He'll play bishop to g7. He'll play the knight to d7. Excuse me. Maybe put the bishop on b7 or on a6, and castle kingside perhaps. But at some point, he's going to want to play again e7 to e6 or e7 to e5 or maybe both. And once he does that, the bishop on g2 is immediately very well employed. Also, the bishop on g2 supports a pawn advance to e4, which may be something that he'll want to try. So I think that's a pretty reasonable way to handle the position. The drawback of playing a move like g3 is that there could be shots from Black like f4 or h5 and h4 trying to break down the structure over there. So that I think is a legitimate concern, but it kind of plays both ways. I mean, Black has to worry about the status of his own king as well. So I think what White should do is play g3 at some point, but kind of delay castling and wait and see what Black does with his own king. The other thing that White wants to achieve, so I mentioned there were two plans, or two things that White should try to get in this position. The second one, as I delete the arrows, is to play c3. So by doing that, I think it's going to help a couple of things. So one is that with c3 and rook to c1, the rook gets into the game, and it also neutralizes the bind that Black can achieve on the dark squares. So by putting this all together, I think White gets a reasonable position. So the way that Schlosser played, I think, is a model. He played c3. Black swapped, rook c1. And now that Black is castled, White can get on with the fianchetto and his own completion of development. And actually here, White played a nice move. He played bishop to h3. So not putting the bishop on g2, but putting it on an even more aggressive square. Can always go back to g2 later on. Now they castled. And here, unfortunately, the players agree to a draw, because I think this is quite an interesting position, and it would have been nice to see what would have happened here. But I think White is fundamentally sound in this position. So you'll notice that all of a sudden there's no real bind on the queen side anymore with that bishop. I mean, it's still a very good bishop, Black's dark square bishop, but the pawn on b4 is gone. There's no worries about a piece getting embedded on c3 at some point. And it's just a very interesting and unclear situation we have here. White's pieces are well placed, but Black still has the bishop here, and has the possibility of going for queenside play with maybe c4 at some point, maybe rook to b4, bishop d7, a5, a4. So there are various ways for him to try to go about attacking White's queenside, while Black's kingside is a little bit loose. He's not in any immediate danger of being mated or anything, but White has potential for play over there too, and certainly enough that Black probably can't go too crazy with his queenside play. He'll have to at least keep alert for what could happen to his king. Okay, so that's what I think White should have done. In the game, I think Tangborn found a less effective plan. So he played e3, and I don't think the bishop is going to be able to achieve as much as it would like to on either e2 or d3. And plus, there's still the issue of the half-open g file for White to worry about. Okay, Black played bishop to g7, rook c1, knight d7, c3. So again, I think this is the right way to handle the position for White as far as the queen side is concerned. Okay, Black played rook to b8, and now I think White maybe loses the thread a little bit here. I think what he should have played is c takes b4, and after rook takes b4, again bishop to d3, kind of corresponding to bishop to h3 in the fianchetto line. Knight e5, takes, and now f4. So I like f4 a lot. It stops Black from playing f4, and it also blunts the bishop. So if the bishop on e5 is very good, because it's looking on two very, very nice diagonals, and so f4 makes it choose. And also it prevents the Black rook from swinging over to a square like g4 or h4 at some point. So f4 I think is kind of an effective move. Bishop f6, queen h5, so piling up on this f5 pawn. And again, tying black down a little bit, so not letting him have a free hand to gain play on the king side, queen side, pardon me. Okay, so rook to g8, little counterattack, castles, protects the pawn. Queen d7 protects the f5 pawn. And after, let's say, knight to c3, I think the position is roughly equal. White's plans include things like e4 maybe at some point, trying to build up for that, though that's kind of risky, but it's at least a possible idea. Another idea might be to go for something like a4, the idea of bishop to b5. And if black plays a6, maybe the bishop goes not to b5 then, but to c4. The queen could retreat to e2, and you could try to exert some pressure against that with the aim of forcing the a pawn to move. So again, I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the best idea, but it's a possible idea. And of course, don't forget, there's pressure against h7. Another idea might be to play rook to f3 and g3 to swap off the black rook and make black's king a little bit weak. Now, black's king can always kind of run out to c7, but if he does that, then he's really abandoning the king side. So, at any rate, the point is that I think white has a number of things he can do to keep active here and not let black just build up on the queen side. All right, so instead of c takes b4 and playing bishop to d3 and so on, white chose bishop to e2. And again, as I said, this is a bit of a passive approach, really. It's not clear what exactly he's going to achieve with this development. Okay, so black plays a5, and now he has the possibility of meeting c takes b4 with a takes b4, trying to maintain the bind. He can still play rook takes b4 if he wants also, but this is just a new option. Okay, white castled, knight f6, which is a good move. Could put pressure on the pawn on d5, as well as play knight to e4, and maybe, as we'll see in the game, could even find another square to go to. Okay, so white plays bishop to f3, which covers both e4 and d5. Black castles, and rook to e1. So white has finished his development, but these pieces really, they're not gelling. They're not working together. The only way in which they can even really get any positive play going is with a plan involving e4. But it's not even clear how good that is, because after e4, black could simply capture, take the second bishop, and then play bishop to f5. So, right, if e4, take, knight takes, rook takes, and then maybe bishop to f5, and the bishop just drops back to g6. So white won't have any attack on the king side really at all, and then black can start to expand. And he'll also have tremendous pressure on the queen side with the bishops on g6 and g7 strafing through the middle of the board. But that's at least a possible idea for white. But that aside, I mean, he's just got no active plan at all. The knight on a4 is just permanently bad as long as it's out there, and there's no really likely plan that involves its being useful at its current location. The knight on c4 looks nice, but again, it really doesn't do anything either. I mean, there's no pressure on d6. White's pawn isn't going to make it to e5, at least not for a long time. I mean, if you try to plan with f3 and e4, I mean, even there, I mean, getting a pawn to e5 is useless. It hits the a5 pawn, the knight on c4 does, but that's, of course, protected. The queen's doing nothing. The rook on c1 has no real prospects on the c file. So it's just a very difficult position for white. I mean, he's not in big trouble yet, but it's just a position where it's very easy for black to keep making moves that improve his position, but not at all easy for white to do the same. Okay, so black plays rook to d8, and this is, again, a perfect illustration of a way in which black can really make his position better and more lively, and create some new things for white to worry about. So the point of rook to d8 is that the d6 pawn is protected, so now black can play e6 or e5, or maybe both, without having to worry about d takes e6 and then knight or queen takes d6. If black can't get the pawn to e5, then white is going to have an even tougher time achieving any play at all. Okay, so white decides to just kind of regroup here, realizes that the c4 square isn't giving him very much to work with, and by playing knight to d2, he prepares c4, or also e4. Okay, black played e6, white played c4, and okay, the good side of this is, again, the d5 pawn is more secure. Whether that's ultimately to his advantage or not is not so clear. And the other point is that, of course, he's gotten rid of the backward pawn, and c3 is, again, less useful for black. On the downside, of course, c4 is no longer available to his pieces, and with the center fixed, now black is going to start to play on the king side. So he plays e5, and now I think white has maybe a last chance to get some life here. So what he should play is e4. Again, just fighting for some space, not letting black get complete control over the remaining 4 open files on the king side. So after e4, black can play bishop to h6, which is a good move, redeploying the bishop on a more active diagonal. But still, I think after something like e takes f5, bishop f5, and then rook to a1, with the idea of following up with knight to e4, I think white is just in time to be okay here. And I think this position is probably equal. If black could have gotten e4 in here safely, then of course he'd have an advantage, but he can't. So I think this would have been, again, white's last best chance to achieve a decent position. In the game he plays knight to f1, which is just, again, another really passive move. But it's hard to see exactly how black can exploit this. And maybe white's thinking with something like this. If black tries f4, well, no problem. We play e4, and we've got everything kind of blockaded. On the other hand, if black plays e4, well, okay, the bishop retreats, but now black has some problems with the dark squares. So white can try to maneuver a knight to f4, or in some other way, just take advantage of the weakness of the dark squares like f4 and maybe g5 and so on. So it looks like the position would become really static, and there wouldn't be very much for black to be able to do with it. So I think that's not quite right, but it's a plausible idea. In any case, this is a good place, I think, to stop the recording and try to figure out what black should do to try to gain some play here. So he's got more space. His pieces are certainly more active, but it's a fairly locked up position, and white's kingside looks at least pretty reasonable here. Looks pretty safe. So what should black do? Take a couple of minutes, I would say, at least, maybe even 5 minutes if you're feeling ambitious, and try to come up with some kind of plan for black to gain play. Okay, so I'll assume you've all done it and you've come up with a brilliant idea. And in fact, I think Kuljasevic came up with an excellent idea here. He played king to h8, and the point of this is to play rook to g8 and start migrating pieces over to the king side. And in the game, it works brilliantly. Now, I don't think that black is winning just yet, but I think this is a very dangerous idea, and Tangborn was unable to find an adequate defensive plan. Okay, he played knight to g3, and the knight looks good there, but the problem is a knight there, unlike a pawn on g3, is, well, can simply be kicked away. So knight to g3, black continued with rook to g8, and now Tangborn comes up with, I think, a very poor idea, unfortunately. So it's a tough position, but the plan he comes up with just isn't going to solve the problem. So he plays bishop to e2, and this move is actually okay, but it's the first move of a very unsuccessful plan. And now Kuljasevic plays queen to e7, just further building up over there on the king side, and we'll see exactly what he has in mind shortly. Okay, now here I think what Tangborn should have played is queen to c2, attacking the f-pawn, and after e4, now f4. So this, I think, is the key move here, and this tries to bottle things up. Now, if black doesn't capture en passant here, he maintains some advantage, but again, with 6 files pretty much locked up, white's defensive chances are still pretty good. I mean, there's just not that much room for black to operate with, and so even though white does have still some things to worry about, he probably can hold. And if black takes on f3, on the other hand, so trying to open up more ground, well, I think this helps white quite a bit, though. So bishop takes f3, and now black's attack still isn't really going yet, but white has different things that he can try. So first of all, he's got some pressure against his pawn on f5. Second of all, he can play e4, and that'll really open up the board for his pieces. So one possible continuation is this: knight to g4, hitting the pawn on e3, maybe preparing queen h4 in some lines. And here, white should probably just take, knight to b2, so we try to get this piece into the action as well. It can maybe come to d3 and then to f4, where it's not so bad, or maybe to f2 in some cases, but probably f4 is much more sensible. Okay, bishop to c3, rook e2, rook g6, rook f1, rook h6, and now knight f5. So again, white's just in time to prevent black from really fully executing his kingside ideas. And in a position like this, I mean, I'd say it's about equal. Black's got a great bishop on e5. I mean, it's almost a work of art. It's so strong. But black has some slight pawn weaknesses over on the king side. White's rook on f5 is really beautiful, and the rook on e2 is doing a terrific defensive job protecting the pawn on h2 as well as the pawn on e3. So while black is going to have the initiative here, white seems to be doing pretty well, and there are some static features that are in his favor. So again, not such a bad position for white. And this is, I think, again, just what he had to do. So this idea of queen to c2 followed by f4 was really his last chance to, I think, save the game. Okay, instead he played bishop to d3 with a similar kind of idea, but this is just a far inferior implementation of that idea. So e4, and now he continues with, I think, the wrong plan with bishop to c2. He's really going to need that bishop on the king side, as we'll see really right now after black's next move. So knight to g4. And already white is in huge trouble now. So before, you know, the trend was going in black's favor, but there wasn't really anything too concrete. Well, now it's concrete. Okay, the first thing is that black wants to play queen to h4, and if white tries h3 to kick the knight away before that happens, well, knight f2 is already just winning, because after king takes f2, queen to h4, white just has no good way to defend the knight on g3. The threat, well, there's many threats, but the most obvious threat is bishop to e5, and if white tries queen h5 to challenge the black queen, it just doesn't matter. Black plays bishop to f6, and there's no way to defend the knight. So white can swap queens, but black is still going to take on g3 next move. He'll have an extra pawn. He'll have still an ongoing kingside attack, the bishop pair, more space, everything. So this is just straightforwardly winning for black. So h3 is not good enough to save the day, so white tries knight to f1. So getting the knight away from these various tactical possibilities and protecting the pawn on h2. So it's a good idea, but it's just everything's too slow here. So queen to h4, hitting the pawn on f2. White plays g3, blocking the attack on f2 and trying to shut down the g file. But now, of course, there are new weaknesses, especially the f3 square. So you can see something like knight to e5, knight f3 can be a real problem. Okay, black plays queen to h3, and now white plays f4. Okay, so this is a very straightforward attempt to prevent moves like knight e5, and also it's clearing the second rank, so that way you can see there could be other ideas too for black, like bishop to e5 followed by rook g6 and rook h6. So f4 is an attempt to just shut down all of that business, and of course if e takes f3, then the queen goes to f3. So he's clearing the second rank to defend here, or with the rook, same idea, and also trying to lock up more squares, more files, take away the e5 square. So it's all very, very plausible, but as usual, there's a tactical problem, and see if you can figure out what it is. So again, this is a good place to try to find the best move for black. See if you can do it. Take a couple of minutes, and when you come back, we'll find the win. Okay, so welcome back. Black actually has a couple of ways to win, maybe even more, but two in particular. And they exploit the fact that this remaining construction here of pawns on h2 and g3 is now kind of weak. So the f2 pawn was actually very important for holding all of this together. So even though the knight on f1 is protecting these guys, as we'll see, it's just not enough. So there are a couple of ways, as I said, for black to win. I think the flashiest is the one that Kuljasevic didn't choose, though actually they're both pretty flashy. So the neat move, or maybe the neatest move, is bishop to b2, which looks just completely ridiculous, but the idea is simple. It's just a clearance move, so that way the rook can get to g3 faster. So bishop to b2, white might as well take, otherwise he'll just lose the exchange and still have to suffer black's kingside attack. And now knight takes h2. Okay, so first of all, white can't take on h2. I mean, he can, but he just gets mated right away. Rook g3 or queen g3, and then mate on g2 ensues. Okay, so maybe white could try king f2, hoping to just run out of the box here. But still, after knight takes f1, he's just dead. So rook f1, rook g3, and here's a particularly amusing variation. King e1, and now rook to g2. And what's amazing about this position is that even though white's got a whole herd of pieces around his king and close to the e3 square, nobody can protect e3, at least safely. So this threat is just it's just decisive. The bishop on c2, of course, can't protect it because it's the wrong kind of piece. The knight on b2 can't because c4 and d1 are occupied. The rook on c1 can't. The rook on f1 can, but rook f3 is obviously just completely stupid. And the queen can only do it by sacrificing herself, and that won't be enough to save the game anyway. So that's just one winning line. Another winning line is the one that was chosen by Kuljasevic. He plays knight to h2 straight away, and then after knight takes h2, not queen takes g3 check, but the very attractive bishop to d4. So a very nice move, not only because it's, of course, clearing the path for the rook to hit the pawn on g3, but because the bishop on d4 is also going to be very useful, hitting the pawn on e3. Of course, white can't take for the same reason we saw a moment ago in the bishop to b2 variation. Black has checkmate in 2 by either rook takes g3 and then queen at g2 mate, or also, again, just queen takes g3 and queen at g2 mate. So same idea. So e takes d4 is impossible, but there's not really anything that's much better. You could try knight to f1, resuming the defense of the g3 pawn, but rook takes, knight takes, queen takes, king f1. And now the best way to win, I think, the fastest way, is queen h3 check. And note that white can't play queen to e2 because of queen to g2 mate. So that's an important little tactical finesse that really makes white's position hopeless. So king to f2, queen h2 check, king f1, and now bishop to f6. And this simply wins. If white tries queen to e2, then queen h1, king f2, and bishop to h4 is mate. And if white tries bishop to b1, just hoping to clear some ground and also maybe play rook c2 or queen c2, it's just not going to matter. So queen h1, king f2, bishop h4, and we force him to e2, where we have this mate. Okay, so knight f1 is not going to save the day for white. So the last try is what Tangborn actually tried in the game. He played g4. So this is actually pretty sensible. Now rook takes g4 is just not really a worry at all. But now we see the value of this bishop on d4. So bishop takes e3 check, and black is just going to end up regaining all of his material with interest, and we'll still have an attack. Okay, if white tries king to h1, well, bishop takes f4, threatening queen h2 mate, rook e2, f takes g4, and now we're just threatening g3, and this is winning, bishop e4, g3, and so on. Alright, so instead of king to h1, white tried to buy black off with rook takes e3, queen takes e3 check. And now the material is just even. In fact, I think black is actually up slightly. Yeah, he's got a rook and 2 pawns for 2 minor pieces, for 2 knights. And of course, when one of the knights is this block of furniture on a4, then of course it's really more like he's got a rook and 2 pawns for for just 1 piece. And really, this bishop on c2 is not a whole heck of a lot better than the knight on a4 either. Now, black's rook on b8 isn't operating yet, but it can get into the game pretty quickly. The problem is for these other 2 pieces of white's, they're not. Alright, furthermore, white's losing even more material here, so this is just going to be an utter disaster. King h1, f takes g4. So now the threat is to just play g3 and then g2 and keep on trucking. G1 or queen of g3 would even are both possible there too. Okay, so white plays queen of g1, queen takes f4. So now black has a rook and 4 pawns, and they're connected pass pawns for the 2 minor pieces. So this is completely resignable, but happily we get to see a few more moves because the end is kind of nice. Okay, rook f1, queen e5, and here black doesn't have to worry about rook takes f7 because he just plays g3, and if the knight moves away, g2 wins the queen. So white plays rook to f2 with an idea, but it's not anywhere near enough, and black finishes the game with a series of just hammer blows, one after another. Really a lot of fun to finish a game the way that Kuljasevic does now. So he starts off with g3, forking the knight and the rook. Okay, this was white's defensive idea, rook to g2, with the point that if black played g takes h2, it would be an absolutely horrible conclusion. Rook takes g8 as mate. Of course, black doesn't fall for that and makes another powerful move, bishop to h3, and now it's a real disaster. So we're threatening still to take on h2, but we're threatening bishop takes g2, and then g takes h2 as well. Okay, white plays knight to f1, hoping that after bishop takes f2, king takes g2, maybe he's got a little bit of a blockade, or bishop takes, queen takes, and then the king can go to g1. But black plays another power move, queen to h5. And now the threat is to play, well, again, there's so many threats, but one of them is to play bishop takes g2, and then queen to f3, and then g2. So I can just enter these. So bishop takes g2, king takes the only legal move, queen f3, king h3 is the only legal move, and now actually you could also play rook to g6 with the idea of rook to h6 mate, or you can play g2 check. And this is pretty gruesome as well. In fact, this is just mating. Yeah, mates in one move. Because if he plays knight to g3, well, queen takes g3 as mate. If he plays king to h4, queen to g4 is mate. And if he plays king to h2, then queen to h5 is mate. Though, of course, you could also take on f1. And anyway, it's just obviously completely devastating. So queen to h5 is a very nice move. Okay, white played knight takes g3, bishop takes g2, double check, king takes g2, and now the final move of the game is another crusher, rook takes g3 check. And here white finally threw in the towel. The point is that after king takes g3, white's going to lose both the queen and get checkmated. So rook to g8, queen f3, rook g1, and queen f2 is mate. And as we see, the bishop on c2 and the knight on a4 just never got to really come back into the game. So after they went to their bad locations, they were just stuck there. They didn't help with the defense. It was completely useless. So a very nice attack by Kuljasevic. Not really good play by Tangborn, but this kind of thing happens when you get in a position where it's just really very unfamiliar ground. Bad things can happen, even if you're a very strong player. I mean, I think for all of us, really, the point is, let's say you're an 1800 strength player. Well, what that means, or what it can mean, is that in positions that you're familiar with, maybe you can play like a 1900 or even a 2000 strength player, but there are positions where you're less familiar with what to do, and there you're maybe a 1600 or a 1500. And I think that really holds, wherever you are on the food chain. I'm near 2400. Some positions I can play maybe even like a 2500, but other positions I'll play like a 2100 or maybe even a 2000 if it's really unfamiliar. So that's, I think, what happened to Tangborn. I mean, he got in a position where the familiar landmarks just weren't there for him, and he didn't know what to do. And black found a good idea. So black found this great idea with king to h8, and then rook to g8, and just building up. And white just had no idea how to defend against it, and got rolled off the board. So a very nice game by Kuljasevic, especially the concluding attack was really outstanding, and some very enjoyable tactics. So I mean, it wasn't just the nice build-up, but he found this very nice tactical idea later on with knight takes h2 and then bishop to d4. So very attractive, and I hope you enjoyed this game. So it was an entertaining game, and I think in some ways instructive too. So thanks a lot, everyone. Again, don't forget to check out my blog, chessmind.powerblogs.com. So I think you'll hopefully find that entertaining and instructive as well. And I'll see everyone next week. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.